Because of time, let me take this opportunity to invite the chair of Africa Group of Negotiators, our AGN chair, one of us, who is leading the negotiation wing, to come and take the program from here. Thank you very much. Welcome. Sir.
Your Excellency, the Right Honorable former Prime Minister, Your Excellency, our Minister for National Treasury and Economic Planning, Your Excellency, the Minister for Environment, Climate Change and Forestry, Your Excellency, the Minister for Lands, Public Works, Housing and Urban Development, Your Excellency, the Ambassador of Azerbaijan, who is in the House, Excellencies, distinguished participants from across the continent. Your Excellency, we thank you very much for honoring to come to officiate on this important meeting. This year, in the next few months, we'll be heading to Baku, Azerbaijan for the 29th Conference of Parties on the climate change. And Your Excellencies, the meeting there, the discussion will be on climate finance. The big expectations that we hope to deliver in Baku will be on climate finance. Experts and various studies have indicated that as climate impacts continues to expand, and from droughts, floods, wildfires, heat waves, and many other types of impacts, the amount of funds flowing for developing countries continues to diminish. The expectation is the impacts of climate change require, and sustainable development goals require, the tune of 5.4 trillion US dollars. But Africa continues to receive less than 1% of the climate finance of the world. And the people who are seated here are the people who are supposed to lead in the preparation of concepts and programs and projects for Africa to be able to access those funds. So it is important that this meeting is coming a few weeks before we go to COP to develop a common African strategy. Your Excellency, last week we had very successful meetings in Nairobi where the African lead negotiators on climate change put together a position paper for the continent that will be presented to our ministers next week but one in Abidjan in Cote d'Ivoire, and subsequently to our heads of state and government during the UN General Assembly in New York. Therein, Your Excellency, we are proposing that Africa's requirement to deliver on the goal of new collective quantified goal that you require at Baku is up to 1.3 trillion US dollars. Currently, as we all recall, 2009, at the Copenhagen summit, there was $100 billion that was agreed by the global community. It took more than 10 years for the developed world to achieve that. Last year, we were told by OECD that the developed countries reached the 100 billion target. But of course, there's a lot of queries what type of funding it was. The quality of the funding is really very important. Most of that money was not concessional, not grant, but loan that continues to indebt us. So, Your Excellency, we look forward to your ideas and your input and your guidance to this group that will be leading the financial discussions at the COP. With those few remarks, Your Excellency, allow me to invite His Excellency, Ambassador Sultan, who will be our host in Baku this year, and who will be the representative of incoming president of COP29. Your Excellency, Ambassador, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you so very much. Honorary Prime Minister Odinga, let me follow the way our dignitaries will refer to, honorary cabinet secretaries, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's a huge honor and privilege for me to be here with you today. My country will be hosting COP29, and as we're looking forward to discussions in Baku in November, these kind of discussions, these kind of preparatory meetings are of great importance. I would like to first of all congratulate my Kenyan friends on the major role the country is playing on climate change related issues at the continent. We all know the success of the African Climate Summit held in Nairobi last year. His Excellency President Ruto is chairing the Special Commission of the African Union on climate change. And at the same time, my dear friend and colleague who just spoke before me is chairing the African group of negotiators. We're determined to ensure success of the event in Baku. We're looking forward to discussion on ambitious plans, however backed up by enabling action. Finance is one of the key issues at the agenda, and the issue of impact or linkage between the urban development and climate change is one of our top priorities, both because of the COP in November, but also because my country will have the honor of organizing the one after World Urban Forum. The next one will be in Egypt in November of this year, but WUF 13 that will be taking place in 2026 will be taking place in Azerbaijan as well. There is a lot that I would want to add. There are so many important, interesting elements, discussions, developments, and I'm sure they will be covered, but in the interest of time, I just would like to congratulate organizers of this event. I would like to admire the level of the discussion, and I think that the mere panel here proves major interest and commitment of Kenya to carrying the torch of climate change and a special aspect or special element of financing for climate change proudly and successfully. Thank you so very much.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, and as we have constantly reassured you, the African Group is committed to support a successful delivery at COP29 in Baku. And Your Excellency, can I now invite Her Excellency, our Minister for Lands, Public Works and Housing, Madam Alice Wahome, to come and read a statement.
Good morning, everybody. Habari asubuhi. Yes, thank you very much, the Special Envoy. The Right Honorable Raila Odinga, EGH former Prime Minister of the Republic of Kenya, my colleagues, Cabinet Secretaries, Aiden Duare, the Cabinet Secretary for Environment, Forest and Climate Change, my colleague, new Minister John Bandi, the Cabinet Secretary for National Treasury and Economic Planning. I want to recognize Special Envoy and the role he's playing in this particular meeting. All distinguished guests seated here, our visitors from different countries, leading the negotiation team. I have seen a list of various countries in terms of recognition. We have the Embassy of Zimbabwe, we have the Embassy of Azerbaijan, and the ambassador, my good friend, is here. Brazil is here. Representative for Embassy of Morocco, the PS for the Kingdom of Eswatini. We met before with her Minister for Housing. And I have Professor Ruth Kaitumuri, World Bank, and other partners are here. The Arab Republic of Egypt, and our county governments as key partners in this particular meeting. I know that we have representation members of Parliament. My former colleague is here. Let me quickly go through my statement and say that it's a great honor, Honorable Prime Minister, even to share this platform with you, and privilege to welcome you all to this crucial meeting, focusing on integration processes between Africa, green climate financing, national designated authorities, and the building climate resilience for the urban poor. This initiative we call BIGP, housed by my ministry. We appreciate the presence of the former Prime Minister in this particular meeting and our candidate for the Africa Union Commission Chair for honoring and gracing this event. Distinguished participants, your presence here today is a testament to your unwavering commitment to addressing climate change impact in our country, and in our countries, and particularly in the urban areas where I am now engaged, and cities, which is one of the most pressing and emerging challenge for Africa, particularly because of the population growth that we are experiencing in our urban cities. As majority of us in this room may recall, Kenya and Brazil are co-leading the development and operationalization of BIGP on behalf of the global community, Africa included. Indeed, a prosperous, inclusive, resilient, sustainable Africa in line with Agenda 2063 can only be achieved on the platform of long-term strategy for inclusive, resilient urban development. This included climate proving the new development vision for Africa, urbanization, and assuring that major climate vulnerabilities are adequately addressed in our planning, design, programming, leading to enhanced urban resilience. In this spirit, allow me to acknowledge the presence of all distinguished partners in this hybrid session. We are honored to have you here representing your esteemed organizations who are at the forefront of the global climate financing discourse. Your collective expertise and experience are invaluable as we seek to chart a path towards a resilient future for our urban poor. BIGP initiative, which was launched by the government of the Republic of Kenya in collaboration with the global and regional partners, is not just a project, it is a call to action, a call to address the critical vulnerabilities faced by the urban poor. And therefore, I want to remind you participants that this initiative is expected to take off completely in all our countries. The initiative seeks to build resilience, enhance adaptive capacities, and ensure that these communities can thrive despite the challenges that we are facing due to climate change. Honorable guests, BIGP initiative is deeply rooted in the outcomes of 2019 United Nations Climate Action Summit, where global leaders, including our own, committed to addressing climate change with urgency. Since then, we have witnessed an increasing recognition of the need for targeted action and also action and intervention that address the specific vulnerabilities that we are talking about. The African Union, and I have referred to our candidate there, during the 37th ordinary session in February 2024, further acknowledged the pivotal role of the African green climate financing. And therefore, we're seated here looking for funding, negotiating, noting what the Special Envoy has said, 1% to Africa in terms of drawing funding for climate financing is a joke. It is not, we cannot talk about adequacy, we cannot talk about inadequacy, it's more or less not there. 1% out of 100. I think we have everybody who we need in this room to deal with those figures, and it is urgent. So we need to deliberate with a serious focus to have that parameter changed as quickly as possible. And as we go to COP28, of course, it is expected that we will be able to plan together and agree on how to deal with some of those challenges. And therefore, as we gather here today, it is crucial to focus on the expected outcomes of BIGP itself. Improving, and the objectives are that we want to improve the living conditions of the urban poor. We also want to have increased access to climate financing, and we want enhanced capacity for local governments. And finally, we want stronger regional and global partnerships built by us. Excellencies, why is this initiative so critical? The answer lies in the stark reality that climate change is already having devastating effects. Moreover, Africa contributes less than 4% of the global greenhouse gas emissions, yet it bears the brunt of climate change impact. This disparity underscores the need for greater support. BIGP, therefore, is a direct response to these challenges. Honorable guests, the success of BIGP in our countries, in Africa, as an initiative, hinges on strong partnerships and collaboration. We are grateful for the support so far our partners, including UN Habitat, the African Union, the Commonwealth Secretariat, UCLG Africa, and I want to confirm that we'll be hosting the regional offices here, and the government has approved the hosting, and my ministry will provide facilities to host the office. And others, we also have AFDAN, we have ARIN, and others that have been very instrumental in this work. I would like to express my deep appreciation to the government of Brazil, Turkey, Germany, and other development partners for the invaluable contributions they have given. Let me move quickly and say, as we move forward, let us remember that ultimate goal for BIGP initiative is to build a better future for the urban poor communities. A future where they are not just surviving, but they are thriving in a climate resilient environment, leaving no one behind. The anchorage of BIGP is therefore a flagship program for African cities within Africa Union Commission, and it's a priority area for the good of the continent. And the Right Honorable Prime Minister, we know that the plight of the urban poor population is a matter so dear to your heart, and you will be the champion for BIGP in the pre and post campaigns for the African Union city, with a government that we fully support. As I conclude, we are looking forward to receiving all the no objection for the pilot countries to facilitate immediate submission of the BIGP readiness project to the green climate financing for approval and execution. We are talking about implementation, and we do not have time to deliberate in terms of not making it clear that our action plans are known. We have already had several resolutions. What is needed now is call to action, complete implementation of the resolutions we have agreed, and I'm sure there will be serious resolutions here in terms of funding, in terms of the approach, in terms of the attitude. We must push our partners to open the pass, and you already know that the President of the Republic of Kenya is a champion in this area. His position on change of the architecture of financing is something that Africa must continue to engage with and push so that it happens earlier than later. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Honorable Cabinet Secretary. As the Cabinet Secretary said, 50%, the world is urbanizing very rapidly. 50% of the global community is expected to be living in urban areas. Africa is the fastest urbanizing continent, with 60% of our population by 2050 expected to be in urban centers. So building resilience for urban populations is really a very critical thing. And we thank the partnership with UN Habitat, with United Cities and local government and all other partners. Allow me now, Your Excellency, to invite the Cabinet Secretary who is going to lead the ministerial discussions for Africa, given that Kenya is the chair of the negotiation team, and our Cabinet Secretary will be the lead minister leading the discussions on negotiations. The Honorable Cabinet Secretary for Environment, Climate Change and Forestry. You have the floor, sir.
The Right Honorable Raila Odinga, former Prime Minister of the Republic of Kenya, my colleague Honorable John Bandi from the National Treasury, Honorable Ali Sohome, our Minister for Lands, Public Works, Housing and Urban Development, the Ambassador of Azerbaijan will be our host. His government will host us in COP29. Distinguished guest partners, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I want to begin by expressing my appreciation to my esteemed colleagues for organizing this very, very important meeting, and to the Right Honorable Raila Odinga for his presence today. His role as our candidate for the African Union chairperson and his experience as a former special envoy for infrastructure development in Africa are very invaluable and very dear to us. And because I have an opportunity here, let me say it, 16 years ago, myself, the Honorable John Bandi, the current president, served in his government where he was the Prime Minister. The current president of the Minister for Agriculture, my friend, me and Honorable Badi were deputy ministers busy answering questions in those days. So we know our candidate. We know his experience. We know his capabilities. We are presenting a tested, experienced African statesman, a Pan-Africanist to the continent. And we are very proud that today you have joined us, Your Excellency. I also want to extend my appreciation to the African Union Commission, United Cities and Local Governments of Africa, the 14 national focal points of the Building Resilience for Urban Poor, the African Designated Authorities Network, AFDEN, and all our supporting partners. Your collaboration in addressing the climate change challenge affecting our most vulnerable population in both the rural and urban areas is critical, crucial, and important for us today. This meeting is not just timely, it is urgent. And why do I say so? We have witnessed catastrophic floods globally and with severe repercussions in Kenya and other vulnerable regions of Africa. Coming home, the recent floods in Kenya resulted in over 300 deaths, displaced more than 400,000 people, destroyed thousands of homes, and damaged our very critical national infrastructure, including roads and bridges. The destruction of livestock and farmland further exhibits the crisis we are talking about. And before these floods, Kenya endured one of the worst droughts in its history, displacing over 256,000 people and leaving 4.4 million people facing very severe food insecurity. All these combined impacts of floods and droughts have costed Kenya at least 5% of our GDP. And the effects of the poorest segments of our population, which are found both in the rural and in the urban is very devastating. In Nairobi city, for example, 72% of our population were affected by the floods, with 54% of their livelihood and households completely displaced. The urban poor, who make about 60% of our population and reside in informal settlements and flood-prone areas, are shouldering the heaviest burden of climate change. While the government is actively mobilizing resources to recover from these recent floods, it is clear that we need to do much more to address the dire consequences of this climate change. According to the recent UN Habitat report, if current urbanization rates continue, approximately, which is 50% of Kenyans now will live in urban areas by 2030, another UN report predicts that by 2050, 60% of Africa's population will reside in cities and towns. With a high rate of migration from rural to urban areas, our largest cities ultimately will be increasing and increasingly be located in developing countries. This will exhibit the spread of informal settlements and intensify the threats posed by climate change. And it's imperative that when faced with this, we tackle climate change with the urgency it requires, and we must resolve. At the continental level, adaptation remains our top priority. And as the current chair of the Committee of African Heads of State on Climate, that is Kenya, our President Ruto, and the chair of the African Group of Negotiators led by our Special Envoy on Climate Change, Ambassador Ali Mohammed, we are committed to making adaptation a key important focus in all our multilateral processes as a country. To confront climate change challenges, Kenya hosted the first ever Africa Climate Summit and adopted the Nairobi Declaration, which will guide our continent climate action. Notably, Kenya has enacted several legal and policy measures to address climate change. We have one of the most robust Climate Act. My ministry is currently spearheading the 15 billion tree growing strategy to safeguard our catchment areas and enhance resilience, alongside other pivotal initiatives that promote climate action through carbon markets. In the last 8 months, we have planted over 400 million trees, and we keep on planting them. We are also integrating climate change considerations across all sectors of our economy, in alignment with the bottom-up economic transformation agenda known as BETA of our 5th administration. I am proud of the 2 Kenyan-led initiatives that will be discussed here today, the BIGP and the FLOCA. These programs aim to develop and implement infrastructure and social programs in order to build resilience among our most vulnerable populations, including children, the elderly, women, and the people with disability, as committed in the Nairobi Declaration. Both programs are part of the National Climate Action Plan, FLOCA, and in particular has successfully mobilized financing at both the community level through our county governments. This pioneering program success must be expanded across the continent and to our urban centers. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, the launch of backup by the UN Secretary General in 2019 and its implementation plan by President William Ruto at the African Climate Summit marks a significant step forward in our deliberation. Now, 5 years on, we must advance its implementation. And I want to commend Honorable Alice Wahome and the Executive Secretary of the United Cities and Local Governments of Africa for their leadership in mobilizing resources for backup in the 14 African countries. The successful implementation of this program requires a united effort. Governments, NGOs, civil society, the private sector, international agencies must come together to provide the necessary funding, expertise, and resources to elevate it to the level of FLOCA. And I'm very hopeful that BIGP Kenya will address critical challenges such as housing, water, infrastructure, including even accelerating our affordable housing and slum upgrading program, and supporting the Nairobi River Commission in its cleanup efforts. Your Excellency, former Prime Minister, I want to assure you that I will take the route of the late John Michuki. I will clean Nairobi River Commission. I will take the route of Wangari Maathai in saving Karura Forest today, that you will enjoy. So the 141 industry players and many people who we have done through traceability and who are polluting the rivers, Nairobi rivers, you better think twice. There's a new sheriff in town. I will deal with it. We must see the blue waters of these rivers, all the way from Kikuyu to the end of the eastern part of Nairobi. Nairobi, Your Excellency, former Prime Minister, is the environmental capital of the world. That's why we have UNEP here. And because you spearheaded our constitutional making of 2010, Kenyan constitution is a green constitution. From the preamble, the fourth of the preamble, to many articles, from the preamble, the fourth of the preamble, to many articles, they talk about how environment is our heritage. We must preserve it, we must protect it for now and for the future generation. So I'm going to implement the Green Constitution of 2010. I'm going to implement what our forefathers, key leaders like Wangari Maathai did for our country. As I conclude, I urge the 14 BIGP county representatives and AFDAN as the Green Climate Fund, the focal point to finalize the modalities for implementing the GCF readiness, support to scale up FLOCA, and mobilize resources for BIGP and other resilience building projects. I trust this meeting will produce a clear investment pipelines, both for initiatives which are suitable for presentation under the African Climate Summit Nairobi Declaration Framework. I urge AFDAN to identify and address the barriers to investment in adaptation and the slow rate of disbursement and access, particularly from GCF and other global funds. Present these outcomes for consideration at the AMKEN meeting of the environment ministers that will be held in Abidjan next week, and in all other continental forums that all of us together, our ministers, our technical people, our PSS will be attending. So I call on AFDAN to support similar national and continental initiative to ensure no one is left behind. I wish you all productive discussion. May God bless you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Honorable Cabinet Secretary. As you observed, adaptation is priority for the continent. And as you noted, Kenya spends 5% of our GDP. In fact, UNECA, UN Economic Commission for Africa, figures indicate Africa spends 5 to 9% of our GDP to address adaptation issues, relocating our budget from development to responding to impacts of climate change. Allow me now to invite His Excellency the Cabinet Secretary for National Treasury and Economic Planning. As we all know, and as I said earlier, climate finance will be a pivotal issue, a central issue in COP29. His Excellency President William Ruto is the leader of international financial reform agenda, and debt issue is a big discussion at COP29 and the UN General Assembly, and nobody is better to lead us in that discussion than our minister, our cabinet secretary for national treasury. You have the floor, Your Excellency. And may I also ask you to invite His Excellency, the Right Honorable Prime Minister.
Thank you. Thank you, Ali. Good morning. I have a problem with my voice, but I hope today it will cooperate. Right Honorable Raila Odinga, former Prime Minister of the Republic of Kenya, the Honorable Adan Bare Duale, Cabinet Secretary for Environment, Climate Change and Forestry, and the Honorable Alice Wahome, Cabinet Secretary for Lands, Public Works, Housing and Urban Development. I'm told Professor Ibrahim, who is the Assistant Minister, Technical Affairs, Ministry of Housing, Utilities and Urban Communities of the Arab Republic of Egypt, has also joined us virtually. I want to also recognize Ambassador Sultan, who is going to be our host soon, my sister from Eswatini, and all distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning once again. Let me start by saying that I'm happy to be part of this important event where the continent of Africa has joined hands to address a global challenge which we are all aware of, the climate change, which is directly impacting on our lives and more pronounced among the poor, women and children. I wish to take also this opportunity to welcome you all to Nairobi for this important event. Thank you for honoring our invitation. We are gathered here today because of the significant role that the collaborations and partnerships in our countries play in accelerating climate financing needed to deliver on the goals of the Paris Agreement and drive sustainable, inclusive, and resilient development and growth. As we are all aware, climate change continues to present a major threat to the long-term growth and prosperity, with adverse impacts on the fiscal sustainability and economic well-being, especially for developing countries like ours in Africa, with limited financial resources. So apart from the direct impact and effects of the climate change, it's also putting a serious strain on our purse and our budgets. And as Honorable Duale has just mentioned, and the others before, that we spend a huge chunk of our budgetary provisions in trying to mitigate and address the impact of climate change. And so it is important to address it before, so that we don't end up at the point where now we have to spend so much money to mitigate the same. The impact of climate change and its related response actions have direct effect on our fiscal position by lowering revenues and increasing public spending, and hence a lower envelope of public investment and public goods provision. As climate-filled risks intensifies, losses and damages due to insufficient adaptation responses and a sinkhole of financial protection are a fast emerging major macroeconomic concern for climate vulnerable economies like ours. Despite significant progress in several fronts, the international climate finance and funding commitments have fallen well short of what is required by the African countries to address the climate crisis. Ladies and gentlemen, I am cognizant of the many efforts in the past geared towards improving adaptive capacity and building resilience at global, regional, and national arenas. However, I must admit that the impacts of these efforts are yet to be fully realized due to limited climate financial flows emanating from inadequate technical capacity to develop bankable proposals amid a complex and rigorous climate finance access requirements and procedures. Our people from across the continent are today more deprived in both economic and social realms due to adverse impacts of climate change and disasters, which have increased in frequency and scale not only in the recent past but also at present, threatening environmental sustainability and ecological balance. I am fully aware that African Green Climate Finance's National Designated Authorities Network, which is abbreviated as AFDAN, is already recognized by the Committee of the African Heads of States and Governments on Climate Change, giving the right leverage to undertake its role in finding the African solution in terms of the much needed means of implementation, with key focus on access to climate finance and technology as we shift away from capacity building to capacity strengthening for a low carbon and climate resilient development pathway. If you follow my speech, a little bit different from Honorable Duale's and Alice Wahome, is heavily on finances, and you'd understand why. Your Excellency, as a National Treasury, I am also looking at the off-budget, off-balance sheet financing, and I am really focusing on the financial aspect as my colleagues deal with the technical aspect of dealing with climate change. AFDAN platform is therefore considered as a strategic platform for African countries that strengthen advocates for increased, predictable, and sustainable climate finance for adaptation and mitigation by strengthening south to north cooperation and promoting African-led solutions for climate change. As such, it is our collective responsibility to be part and parcel of this noble movement. AFDAN is intended to address financing challenges by promoting African countries to accelerate the political will and regulatory efforts that will allow them to mobilize climate and green finance at scale, promoting cross-country learning and creating a tangible commitment for green growth. I am confident that AFDAN will enable continent to build consensus, articulate priorities, and share learning and best practices on climate finance solutions developed in unique African contexts. It is an African solution to African challenges. I don't want to call it African problems, African challenges. As I have already flagged out, addressing the adaptation and resilience measures at the local level is at the heart of our conversations and policy discussions. Our attention is drawn to two key programs which resonates with the African needs, notably financing locally led climate actions, popularly known as FLOCA, and building climate resilience of urban poor, the BIGP that Honorable Alice Wahome talked a lot about, at both the rural and urban levels. I'm told we are doing fairly well or averagely well in rural areas, but at the urban level we are doing so poorly as a country and probably as a continent. Kenya has established the FLOCA program that seeks to build climate resilience of communities within the 47 counties of Kenya. Actually, we received funding which we have already disbursed to the counties to implement various activities that are supposed to help in mitigating on climate change. These are the initiatives that we need to implore upon to ensure that Africa is prioritizing locally led solutions to its challenges on climate change. I urge our fellow African countries to benchmark with Kenya on FLOCA and scale it up with even better structures for building climate resilience for their people. The other program on BIGP provides hope for millions of African urban residents, as the glaring statistics notes that majority of the African countries have about, and as Honorable Duale again said, 60% of their population as urban residents, categorized under the urban poor who live in poor neighborhoods. So if we will have 50% of our population in urban areas and you have 60% of them poor, then that is 30% of the population of a country, and suffer the greatest consequences of the climate induced calamities. All this require financing to build resilience and enhance their adaptive capacity. Kenya has achieved significant milestone in climate change and climate finance by putting in place the relevant legal and institutional frameworks, including the Climate Change Act of 2016, National Climate Finance Policy, Sovereign Green Bond Framework, national green fiscal incentive policy framework, among others. But despite all these efforts, we are still grappling with climate change impacts. In the last 1.5 years, Kenya has experienced abnormally heavy rains within 2 seasons that negatively impacted on lives of many Kenyans. I consider the inhibiting factor as limited access to climate finance that should support practicable, locally led solutions. Call to action. As I make this clarion call today, as a continent, we must come out strongly, united and driven by one key agenda of formation and operationalization of AFDAN to enhance our access to climate finance. This is something that we cannot do individually as nations. We must come together as a continent and insist in enhancing climate change financing. If anything, we are not the polluters of the environment. We know where the polluters reside. It is my sincere wish that this important meeting will also come out with a declaration that will shape up the agenda of the upcoming 10th special session of APCEN to be held in September 2024 in Abidjan, Cote d'Ivoire. United Nations General Assembly, which will take place in New York, and COP29 to be held in Azerbaijan, among other regional and global forums. As I conclude, Your Excellency, allow me also to mention something about you, which my colleagues have said, but just as a matter of emphasis. Honorable Duale and I have worked with you very closely. I've actually worked with you more closely than anyone else, and I continue to still work with you because I'm still a member, very strong member of your party, which you lead. I hope I will soon join the Council of Elders of that party, having resigned from the position of the national chairman. I know your position and stand on environmental issues. If there is anyone Africa needs to champion as a champion of issues of climate change, then that person is none other than Right Honorable Raila Odinga. There, I am sure we can't go wrong. Your history is documented. We know how you fought very hard in terms of conservation of even our forests and water catchment areas, Mau forests and other forests across the country. And so we would not go wrong by having you at the African Union. You will be an advocate and a champion for protection of our environment, and that will go a long way in helping mitigating the climate change. Ladies and gentlemen, it is now my pleasure to invite